מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא יחסר, בנודה שירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני, נפשי ישובב ינחני, במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. דשנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. O Lord, what is man that you should regard him? Man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow. They are like a dream, like grass which is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes, and in the evening it fades and withers. The years of our life are few. Their pride is but toil. They are soon gone, and we fly away. So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. Guard the innocent, and behold the upright, for there is posterity for the man of peace. Surely God will redeem my soul. The Lord redeems the souls of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. The dust returns to the earth as it was, but the spirit returns to God who gave it. It's with sadness that we are all gathered today to bid farewell to a good friend, Lloyd Friedman. We will in a few moments also hear from family members about his remarkable life. And I would like to mention two qualities, two qualities about Lloyd that I believe are inherent qualities to Jews. First of all, Lloyd was not just a survivor, he was a fighter. During these weeks in synagogues, we will be reading the parshas, the Torah portions that speak about the first Jew, our forefather Abraham. His life was remarkable. He defied the odds at every turn. He survived the most difficult situations. First, he leaves his home, his country, his family, and he travels to a new land. And on arrival to this new land, to the land of Israel, he's met with famine and hardship. His wife is taken from him on two occasions. He fights mighty kings to free his nephew Lot. The rabbis even tell us that Abraham survived the fiery furnace of his arch enemy Nimrod. Some would call Abraham a survivor. I prefer to call him a fighter. And that was Lloyd. He was much the same. This past year, Lloyd turned 100. It's really quite remarkable to think about that number. That's a feat that in and of itself is remarkable. But more remarkable than that is that at the age 100, he lived at home almost to his last day independently. How many people could say such a thing? That's the quality of a fighter. Lloyd's life took him to many places. He flew as a pilot for the Canadian Air Force during World War II on many outings. He survived direct hits to his plane. Yes, He had that Jewish quality, not only a survivor, but a fighter. Lloyd had another great quality, and those of us at the Herzliya synagogue where he attended were privileged to know him, and it's a quality that really struck me. The great Maimonides wrote and rejected extremism. In his works, he wrote about the value of the middle path in character development. Maimonides wrote that in all character traits, we must always find the middle path between two extremes. And yet, there was one exception to the rule for Maimonides, and that exception was humility. Humil- Maimonides wrote that a person can never be too humble. And as our rabbis said, me'od, me'od hevesh val ruach. One should be exceedingly and exceedingly humble. And that really was Lloyd. He was a very, very humble and unassuming individual. A man of so many accomplishments, and yet a man who was so unassuming. A man who did not seek out accolades. A man who preferred to do remarkable things without making remarkable noise doing it. He was a walking model of true humility. May his memory be blessed. May his soul be bound in the everlasting bond of life. And may we all say, Amen. I would like to call upon Lloyd's son, Andy, for the first eulogy.
Thank you for that, Rabbi. Dad has been my ideal human being, my model human being, for the past 57 years. I believe the best of me is when I succeed in emulating him, which is not as often as it should be. I'm sure all of us would benefit from going through a Lloyd Arnold Friedman standards assessment. And that's what I'm going to give you, my assessment of me and how well I measure up to my dad. Dad was a teacher for most of his life, but a very special kind of teacher. He taught by giving lessons in classrooms at St. John's High School and various other schools in small towns in British Columbia and in Saskatchewan. He was an instructor of pilots during the early stages of World War II. But the main way that Dad teaches is not by giving formal lessons or lecturing people. Rather, he has always taught by example. These teachings have been available to all who have known him. I've been extremely privileged to have observed Dad firsthand, and I've tried to follow his teachings. And I know I have not reached his standard by a long chalk. But I believe the best of me is when I have come close to the ideals set by Dad. So here's my report card. I'm emulating Dad when I go to the gym. Dad taught me to exercise regularly. As a teenager, I would occasionally join Dad in the basement at 780 Campbell Street as he went through his Canadian Air Force 5BX exercise program. It's a tough routine, and he followed it scrupulously. I remember Dad dressed in his shorts and his singlet and his running shoes, stretching and bending, crouching, doing press ups and sit ups and running on the spot. And he used to jog outside regularly, long before it became a common pastime. I remember when he came to visit me in England, I would run with him around the Downs in Bristol, struggling to keep up with this gent 30 years my senior. I remember watching his skinny bum getting further and further away from me as I puffed, trying to keep up. In later life, Dad was a founder member of the Refit Center on Taylor, and I would join him there when I was in town. Dad had great friends at the Refit, and I remember the thumbs up that he and his mates would give each other as they passed by. He was a very, very popular man at the Refit Center. But he wasn't just there for the social life. Well into his 90s, Dad could be seen pumping iron on the machines and working his way around the running track. I've not been great at emulating Dad's eating habits, except in one respect. Dad was very careful about his diet. He was acutely aware of medical opinion on diet. When it was considered bad for you to drink coffee many, many years ago, he stopped, just like that. I remember at formal occasions, I was so embarrassed, he wouldn't have coffee, he wouldn't have tea, he wanted hot water, and if it was appropriate, maybe a little bit of milk. That was it. That's become quite popular now, but it wasn't then. When it was considered bad to drink alcohol, Dad stopped. When it was considered good to drink a glass of wine on a regular basis, he drank a glass of wine on a regular basis. When opinion changed, he stopped. Late in life, I've tried harder to get into the Lloyd Arnold Friedman standard. And one bit I have taken to heart, and that is his passion for fresh vegetables, undressed. Dad somehow was never so happy eating as when he was devouring a gigantic bowl of roughly cut vegetables. In fact, Dad's appetite for all healthy food was legendary. I'm sure all of you who have sat down with him for meals have been struck by his enormous capacity for good food. Dad was a model dinner guest. But there are other facets of Dad's teachings that are even more important than these physical ones I want to talk about now. Dad was steadfast in sticking to his principles, even if they were not always in accord with the company he was in. I was so impressed by Dad whenever conversations turned to politics at family gatherings. My uncles and aunts were pretty solidly conservative. Dad was NDP. He was NDP way back to the original CCF days, long before the NDP came into power in Manitoba. Always Dad's sympathies were with the underdog, with the little guy, the oppressed, and especially the needy. There would be arguments in which Dad would state his position simply and calmly, when others incredulously rebutted his unfashionable opinions. He knew what was right, and he was not afraid to say it, whatever others thought or said. But he respected the opinions of others, always, as the rabbi says, with humility, a humble man, but clear in stating his views. Dad was a devoted husband, and he and my mum were truly in love. I could feel it even at the age of 13 when Dad came into our lives, my sister Franny, me, and my mother Lola. It was such a pleasure to see Lloyd and Lola together doing things riding their bikes to Assiniboine Park, traveling, especially to Israel, and coming to visit me in England. They made a great combination. He was the strong, silent type, and she was the bubbly personality, navigating their way through sometimes difficult family politics. They kept up good relations with all, in spite of the strong lines of nil communication as occurred between various factions in our very large family. Dad's calm, unflappable manner and his style of instruction as a patient teacher, and surely as a careful pilot instructor in the Royal Canadian Air Force in the early years of the war, are qualities I've tried very hard to bring to my own teaching. Over the years, I've often been approached by Winnipeggers of all ages who tell me they remember Dad. I went to St. John's. He was my teacher. I remember him as a patient, kind, effective teacher. He gave me a passion for teaching, and I must say I have passed that on to my children, both of whom are teachers. So I score pretty good on that one for Dad emulation. Dad became a school teacher before the war. In the summer of 1940, in spite of the government telling Canadians that everyone should stay in their jobs at that time, he and four other boys drove to Regina to sign up. He had just turned 22. He explained to me they went because they were Jews. They had known about Hitler since 1933. Dad arrived by rail to Brandon in order to train to become a pilot. He completed his training in June 1942 and was commissioned in November. Quite a few pilots or aspiring pilots were killed during training. Planes caught fire, there were mechanical faults, some weren't able to get out of a spin, the maneuver that all pilots had to learn to do. And Dad admitted to me he was terrified the first time he had to do one of these maneuvers. But he got through it. He was a fighter. After his training was completed, he became a flying instructor. And in the summer of 1943, when Dad had just turned 25, he was sent overseas to fly. He joined number 405 Squadron, which was mostly made up of Royal Canadian Air Force men. At first, he had to go through training again, as by then the planes were different, and there was also him graduating to fly in the famous Lancaster bombers. There were 7 altogether in a Lancaster bomber crew, all very young men. I don't know if his crew did so, but it was customary for someone Dad's age, all of 25 at that time, to be referred to as the old man or Grandpa. And of course, he's still known as Grandpa Lloyd to my children and his great grandchildren. The crew went through intense times together during the war. They flew 2 tours and latterly as part of the Pathfinder Force, which located and marked targets with flares for the main bomber force to aim at. Pathfinders are very, very well known in England for their key role in the war and also for the high casualty rate that they suffered. Though many did not make it through the war, Dad and his crew did and formed very close friendships. They regularly corresponded after the war and regularly met up for reunions for the rest of their lives. On December 20th, 1944, Dad was recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Official notification of his achievement was reported in the London Gazette and was reported as follows. Flying Officer Friedman is an outstanding pilot and captain. He is an exceptional leader and organizer who, by his own personal example of fearlessness and extreme devotion to duty, has inspired his crew with the same unquenchable spirit. Undoubtedly, this officer's fine record of achievement and keenness to take part in offensive action will be difficult to surpass. I asked Dad what it was like during the war when he first came to England to visit me 40 years ago, and he was reluctant to talk about it. Oh, that was a long time ago, he said. At that time I wondered if he had some sort of post-traumatic stress, but thinking about it, he seemed the best adjusted person that I knew. Maybe the trauma of the war made him see the problems that stressed people after the war as not so big. Eventually, when we did talk about his wartime experiences, I asked him, "So, what did you win all those medals for?" And his answer, "Oh, just staying alive." Dad certainly never sought or expected to be celebrated for his wartime actions, in spite of his great achievements. In fact, he gave his medals away to a Jewish museum. But certainly Dad felt responsible for the crew, as he did throughout his life feel responsible for others. Dad was a giver and a carer, just as he cared for his parents during their long illnesses. Dad also was there for his beloved Lola, my mother, during her long illness. Dad always felt responsible for the well-being of others. He did good deeds for all around him, and his good deeds were not confined to doing good for his own family or even those he knew personally. Dad served his community. He was for a time very active at the Herzliya, serving on the education committee, but more significantly, being someone who could be relied on to make up a minyan. Dad gave to charity, not only to the shul and of course to Israel. He supported all kinds of humanitarian causes. The compass of his caring went well beyond the local community here in Winnipeg or even in Canada. I have this image of Dad's house with piles and piles of letters and forms stacked on the kitchen table, on the kitchen chairs, on the dining room table, on the dining room chairs, on almost every surface you could possibly see, including upstairs in my old bedroom. Some check stubs, but mostly begging letters, leaflets outlining terrible situations of others, and forms for donating money. In addition, while I was there, many phone calls would come from fundraisers of good causes. And Dad, okay, he didn't answer every single one of those phone calls, but he answered a tremendous number of them. One year I went through, along with Jeremy, who helped organize those things with Dad, all the different charities that he gave money to. It added up to a list of almost 100 different charities that he gave to. Okay, usually small amounts, $18, $36, except of course for the shul and for Israel. In recent years, Dad became increasingly distressed because he could not remember which ones he'd already given money to, because they wouldn't stop asking for money, even if he had given. Sometimes he gave more than once, but that wasn't the great concern of his. What really bothered him was the suffering in the world and his limited funds in order to do something about it. That was what was important to him, all of those good causes. But most of all, my dad gave his time and his attention to others. Dad has been renowned, legendary for his personal support of others in the community. After retirement, Dad gave one to one support to difficult children, but it was particularly for his support for older people that Dad became so well known in the community. Taking old folks to activities at the Rady Center to stay young, to doctor appointments, to hospital appointments, taking people shopping, doing shopping for them, and of course, delivering Meals on Wheels. Dad delivered Meals on Wheels for 20 years for all those old people, 20 years younger than him. Well into his 90s, he was delivering Meals on Wheels. There are so many people in Winnipeg who've been touched by Dad. Dad gave so much to others. His way was so gentle and caring, so calm and clear in his duty to others. Dad instinctively knew what was right. In his everyday activities, he had a deep feeling for God. Dad walked in the ways of God with goodness and humility. He never expected honors for what he did. He did it because it was his duty. He was dedicated to service. It's a cliche to say that we're here to bury a fine person, a stalwart of the community, a life worth living, a real mensch, a man whose life was filled with mitzvahs, a life which we can all agree will be well looked upon by him who Dad was so trustworthy of, trusting of. But in this case, about my dad, Lloyd Arnold Friedman, these terms ring true, outstandingly true. We will all miss him, and we will thank God for his long and fulfilled life.
I'd like to call upon Lloyd's nephew, Martin Pollock, for the second eulogy.
My Uncle Lloyd was the grandfather that I never had. If you needed shelter, he housed you. If you needed food, he fed you. If you needed a shoulder to lean on, he would bear your physical and emotional weight. And if you searched for a soundboard, he would listen. If you needed advice, he spoke. His mind spoke brilliant practicality. Should you wander, his experience provided guidance. The needle of his life compass faced true north with decency, integrity, valor, and with unbendable duty to the principles and values he cherished. From cradle to grave, he was a poster boy of selflessness. He gave of himself to those I love and loved, and he gave to those I knew not of. You heard he drove Meals on Wheels to the young people. He had a gentle soul. He was a gentleman. His essence embodied social justice. He was a man of calm who nourished his mind reading poetry and literature, and he kept himself informed daily, faithfully reading the newspaper and listening to the CBC in his pink kitchen on his pink chair from the 1950s. His love of radio was born in an era when it was vital. It was how information was shared throughout the world. And oh yes, that radio box, a very important piece of technology inside the Lancaster bomber. He relied on his team of brothers, unified in the sky, mission after mission, raid after raid. Uncle Lloyd was the last surviving member of his crew, the only Jew, and the first one for some of his brothers to have met outside the Bible. It was an honor to have met the intact crew members at one reunion held in Winnipeg in the 1970s. There was love and reverence for the captain, and there was mutual regard. Death had been but a few thousand feet drop. With his brave and no doubt scared compatriots, Uncle Lloyd piloted ordinances to be delivered against the Nazi murder machine. On behalf of all Canadians, on behalf of all those who stared down evil, who stood up for freedom and democracy, he was a Maccabee in a grotesque historical epoch, fighting for the vulnerable, our people, and other innocents who below could only pray to God for rescue. He served heroically, with high distinction, with his brand of humility. He was never one to brag or draw attention to himself. After the war, he carried on his principled path and he practiced the noble profession of schoolteacher, navigating minefields of the young and restless. He was kind and task-oriented, but in the day of corporal punishment and behavior modification, make no mistake, as he once told me, the strap hurt Uncle Lloyd more inside his core than it did the troublemaker. And for years, he practiced kosher environmentalism, riding in a 5-person carpool to St. John's High School. He was a pre-fit refit. Prior to any refit center, as a young boy, visiting 780 Campbell with my mom, Sylvia, and brother, Nathan. I remember witnessing Uncle Lloyd dressed in boxer shorts, knee-high socks, not running shoes but dress shoes, and a white undershirt jogging around his basement. What an honestly strange scene, but ahead of his time. My Uncle Lloyd was a modern man, an original member of the Refit Center. Uncle Lloyd attended to his physical well-being regularly, year after year, and he especially enjoyed looping the track. In his late 80s and very early 90s, I used to joke with him and ask, Uncle Lloyd, did you slow down to let the ladies catch you? And he would reply, not today. Uncle Lloyd used to grow beefsteak tomatoes along the south side of his garage. And it was a treat each harvest season to greet the smiling delivery man, clad in shorts with those knee-high socks and again, dress shoes, holding Sunshine Bounty in paper bags. He was a proud grower. For years, he drove a green LeSabre and after that, a maroon Cadillac. He drove with deliberation, 2 hands on the wheels, as if he was taxing the runway to and from his destination where he delivered mitzvot, until I think the age of 93 when he realized he was no longer a safe conveyor for passengers. And for years, the address of poignant memory was the kitchen of 427 Bourne Boulevard, our house where he would come to visit my Baba Sarah with devotion, heart, and regularity. My grandmother peeled sun-kissed oranges. It's an amazing fragrance. Uncle Lloyd would drink hot water, no caffeine. Mother-son reunions were a memorable teaching tapestry. I saw and I watched. He showed his love, he gave his respect, and he cherished time with his mother. And I remember as a young man standing with him awaiting my grandmother's casket in Regina at the synagogue to watch over. How silent and dignified he was as a tear streamed down his face. A grown man teaching a young man what strength of character looks like. Now, kitchens are the heart of every home. And as many of you know, Uncle Lloyd, Uncle Lloyd's kitchen was pink right down to the appliances. He could be found in his office, as I came to call it, reading his newspaper, speaking on the phone, as he sat comfortably on his pink vinyl plywood chair. In his kitchen, he stirred day after day, into his late 90s, his secret weapon on his hot stove. Yes, heavy doses of porridge. And I am warmed by the story of how he and Auntie Lola received their dishwasher as a gift. They used it twice. They missed time they missed time shared washing and drying dishes at the sink. So they resumed their evening manual labor, bathing in each other's presence as the new dishwasher sat idle for years listening to their love. Uncle Lloyd treasured the trees, appreciated the green of the grass, and inhaled the color of the fragrant flowers. He enjoyed the sunshine, the wind, the change of seasons. He thought about the farmers, their land, and their animals. For them, he wished success. He cared about his seasonal visitors, the swallows. He used to leave his garage door open for families to nest each year, providing the best birdhouse in the city of Winnipeg, for hatching, for which I am sure each generation was grateful. The swallows knew generosity. L'dor Vidor, from generation to generation, was a value Uncle Lloyd expounded. He kept a kosher kitchen and he ate kosher, and he was a member of Herzliya and he enjoyed congregating. And yes, on Friday night he gave thanks to God, but I knew to whom he was eternally grateful. The cook, my mother. Uncle Lloyd's gastronomic tours of duty were executed with precision. In perpetuity crowned as he, legend of the table. I remember as a 16-year-old on my birthday, Uncle Lloyd came up into my bedroom with a gift. A single foil electric razor. A man's gift from a real man who shaved with a 3-engine rotary wheel Remington. I had no whiskers, but what a cool buzzing sound. I was now on the real side of adulthood. Uncle Lloyd had a coarse beard, and I caught him on occasion deftly maneuvering that weed whacker. To his last shave, he was an electric man, not a blade and cream guy. And there was Dolce, his white Maltese, almost as vintage as Uncle Lloyd. With his beast of burden, Uncle Lloyd practiced the rules of Torah, making sure that Dolce always nourished first. That was Uncle Lloyd. Tzaddik in nature, tzaddik in principle, tzaddik in performance. Words were always measured, his actions were deliberate. He was faithful to his belief system, as you heard, Andy. Always sturdy, reliable, giving, smart, humanistic, always concerned about the little guy, a social democrat par excellence. When we lost my brother Nathan, he was a pillar of support, and I saw him hurt, and he hurt for all of us. A man of courage, of honor, a loving son, a loving brother, and loving father and husband, and to me most of all, a loving uncle. A grandfather I never had, as his father, my mother's father, had passed away 6 weeks after my birth. To Louis and Freya, to Ellen and Ronnie, to Jeremy, Suzanne, Daniel, Neil, and Marcia, and to Ray, to Karen, and Nathan, and Danny. How lucky were we to have Uncle Lloyd in our lives. You, Uncle Lloyd, made this world a better place. It hurts to say goodbye to a role model. We need to behave with standards worthy of his example. Let his life serve as a beacon on the margin of the bay, flashing in the night, giving direction, to remind us to never lose sight of our humanity, to be kind, to be respectful, to not speak badly of others, to show understanding, to show compassion and sympathy, and to be happy for others in times of their success, and to value proper behavior and repudiate the opposite. I shall close with my uncle's favorite poem. I wandered as lonely as a cloud, by William Wordsworth, also known as Daffodils. And in the name of Uncle Lloyd, and with his love and appreciation, I dedicate this reading to his caregiver extraordinaire, Dorothy. In my mind's eye, just within this past week, I see Uncle Lloyd reciting with me the verses. It goes like this. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched a never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.
For the final eulogy, Lloyd's brother in law, Harvey Pollock.
Lloyd has touched many lives, and each of us see him in our own way. My brother-in-law, Lloyd, was a gentleman who walked with a big stick. The big stick that propelled him through life consisted of his many wonderful attributes of love, compassion, kindness, fairness, respect, patience, tolerance, intelligence, devotion, generosity, and commitment to family and commitment to country, to mention just a few. I believe that beside our sister Pearl, I have known Lloyd the longest of anyone here. I first met Lloyd in mid-July 1954, shortly after Sylvia, his baby sister, and I were engaged. Sylvia was attending the university here in Winnipeg, and I was in law school. Sylvia took me home to Regina to meet the family and their friends. My in-laws lived in a suite in the hotel that they owned. It was hot and the air conditioner was on in my bedroom that I slept in the first night I was there. That morning, I remember Lloyd tiptoeing into my room, checking to see if I was comfortable and pulling the blankets up to tuck me in. I will never forget the kindness and his acceptance of me. If I was to be Sylvia's husband, then he would be my brother, and that, and for all of his life, he was, with love and respect. Lloyd grew up in Saskatchewan during tough times, the Depression. He worked alongside his father, who at the time ranched cattle and farmed a homestead, later to operate grocery stores in many of the small towns in Saskatchewan. The Second World War broke out in 1939. Lloyd was teaching and enlisted in the Air Force in 1941. Lloyd had been born on the 29th of July, 1918, and recently celebrated his 100th birthday. He tried to enroll in the Navy, but was rejected, probably because he could not swim. He then joined the Air Force, trained as a pilot, and later an instructor for student pilots. You've heard this from Andy, but it's worth repeating. He was commissioned as a flying officer in November of 1942, and in July of 1943, after having served as an instructor, was sent to England to fly first with the RAF and then with the RCAF. He flew the Lancaster bombers, had a crew of 7 other airmen who flew with him for the full duration of the war. Towards the end of the war, he flew as a pathfinder, dropping incendiaries, marking the spot for the raiding aircraft to drop their bombs. On his last mission, his chance of survival was less than 4%. On April the 12th, 1945, Lloyd returned home safely. On March the 15th, 1945, Lloyd was awarded the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and his citation has already been read to you by Andy, and I will not repeat it, except to say that he flew between May 1944, and November the 11th, 1944, 38 raids in that short period of time. In total, he flew 58 raids. On his first raid, he was designated to fly leaflets to France. He flew to France. He encountered anti-aircraft. They knocked out his navigational system. He then flew home, but got lost coming over Spain. Had to Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. They sent up aircraft to find him. They led him back to the first airfield in England where he landed safely, but with no more gas. Can you imagine, after that first experience that he endured, having to get back in an aircraft and fly another 57 raids? It took a man of strong will, determination, and devotion to duty. He deserved the DC, the Distinguished Flying Cross, without question, and much more. We're here today to try to remember Lloyd and pay him the due respect that he should have as a good human being. We're never able to really quantify this man's life so that we can really pay him the respect he deserves. On his return to Canada, and on the 12th of April 1945, he was offered a position with Air Canada to fly the Atlantic route to London. But my mother-in-law stepped in and said, "I have lain awake nights worrying about you flying, and now that you are home safe, please refuse." He did. Lloyd returned to teach at St. John's High School, one of his loves. When he reached the age of 65, he retired because he said, "If I can't put my hand on the shoulder of a young boy and girl and say, 'Good job,' I'm finished teaching." You have heard from Andy and from my son Martin how they revered him and how they loved him. So I am hopefully I do not repeat what they have already said to you, notwithstanding that repetition is due, my brother-in-law. Lloyd was the eldest of 5 siblings, Sam, Faye, and Sylvia of blessed memory, and Pearl, who is here with us today. God bless her. My father-in-law had a stroke in 1956. At the time, Lloyd was teaching school in British Columbia. Lloyd left his teaching job and returned to Regina to help manage the hotel with our brother-in-law, Harry Wassell, and at the time, to look after his father. I witnessed how devoted and loving he cared for his father, and the support, love, and care he gave his mother. Lloyd was a brother everyone should have. His devotion and love that he gave his siblings, and they in return, was wonderful to witness. There was never any dissension from any of them. The family unit was blessed with love and caring, fun and joy when each of them met and were together. There was laughter and happiness for each one's achievements. Sylvia was Lloyd's baby sister, and he treated her with kind. She loved him beyond description. I loved Lloyd, and he was so happy to hear of good things and that happened to all of us. Every one of us, including nieces, nephews, and cousins, were the beneficiaries of Lloyd's love and kindness. Lloyd was there with me and Martin during the loss of Nathan, Karen, and Sylvia. His shoulder was strong to lean on. He was an optimist, and he believed that with time, life would be better for all. He was a good Jew and believed in God. He was my hero. He considered me his brother, and I loved him, and I shall forever.
Please rise for the memorial prayer. El Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Amtsei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, Bemalot Kedoshim Utorim, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת אריה בן נתן שהלך לעולמו בעבור שיתנו צדקה בעד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. We will now continue with the burial to the Sharet Tzedek Cemetery on Main Street. The meal of condolences will take place immediately after the burial at the Herzliya Adas Yeshurun Herzliya Synagogue at 620 Brock Street, and Shiva will be observed tomorrow, Thursday, and on Friday between 1 and 4 in the afternoon at Lloyd's home at 780 Campbell Street. So I ask that the pallbearers now please step forward. The pallbearers will leave first, and then we will follow afterwards. I've just been asked also to announce that you put on your four-way flashers, and also the new law is that in a funeral procession you're not allowed to go through red lights.